Good evening, everybody. It's Friday night on the Turnbuckle Bandwagon. Our special guest tonight, competing tomorrow at TurboGrafx 16. The man has been wrestling for 18 years. He has wrestled everywhere. Ring of Honor, Japan, IWGP Tag Champion, X Division Champion. Currently one half of the Impact Tag Team Champions with his bud in the Motor City Machine Guns, Alex Shelley. Alex, sorry, my intro got a little wordy there.
No, it's okay, man.
Yeah, before we get into like the now stuff, I just need to say that as a fan, as a wrestling fan, I'm a tag team wrestling fan. I've been one since I was a little kid. My earliest wrestling memory is like watching like the Hart Foundation wrestle the Rockers like on WF Superstars. So tag team wrestling has always kind of been special to me. To you, what's the special sauce that makes tag team wrestling work and so special?
I think ultimately what it boils down to is the fact that in the same amount of time as you would have in a singles match, you basically get more of a puzzle element to it, and you get more action. By and large, there's more moving parts, and I think for your action junkies, that's a little more exciting.
Nice. And I wanted to say, and I had mentioned this before I got this going. The stuff that like when I was just starting to watch TNA Impact, the stuff that you did with like Paparazzi Productions and Kevin Nash and like the saving of the X Division was some of the most entertaining stuff I'd ever seen.
Thank you.
And I just want to know if you remember, if you recall, like was a lot of that stuff like structured out, or did you just kind of walk into a room like, okay, this is what we're doing today?
I can tell you exactly what happened. What happened was they tried to structure it. And I think at that point in time, as it is in every walk of life, when you first meet somebody, you have no idea if you're going to have chemistry between them or not. Well, it just so happened that Kevin and I had amazing chemistry. And I think a lot of that has to do with the particular socio-demographic area in Metro Detroit, because we both grew up in similar households and obviously a similar geography. And we hit it off right away. And it didn't take too long for the powers that be to realize, like, all right, just let them do whatever they want to do, more or less. And most of the things you see on TV, I would say like 99% of all of those types of segments were literally just us doing whatever we found amusing or bouncing off of one another. And I love those. I hold them near and dear.
You could see it like the interaction between you and Kevin Nash. And I feel like a lot of people, Kevin Nash maybe doesn't get the credit he deserves for being as like funny and clever and quick as he is.
Right. I would definitely agree with that. And honestly, he was a hell of a wrestler. Like there's this match out there. It's Diesel and Shawn Michaels against 1, 2, 3 Kid and Razor Run. It's like one of the best matches I've ever seen in my entire life, probably from like 95. And as far as wrestling went, I thought he was awesome. Everything about Diesel to me was captivating, and that's one of the reasons I got into wrestling. I was a WWF kid growing up. Okay. But as far as being witty and being funny, I think a lot of people who actually know him or have met him can understand that he's got a very dry sense of humor, very macabre. But I believe that he's one of the smartest guys in the business, like without a shadow of a doubt. You can look at his bank account as proof of that. I think he got a bad rep, though, because a lot of people think that he may have held down certain wrestlers in WCW. I have no idea, and I really don't give a shit. He was awesome to me. He helped my career immensely, and I was, like a foot shorter than he was. So clearly he had no bias, at least at that point in time, against smaller guys. I think the bias all along may have probably been the same thing that a lot of people don't like, which is this guy is just not what I see as a pro wrestler. And that happens with everybody. Everybody favors some sort of archetype or certain features in life, right? Like it doesn't have to be pro wrestling. You like people who typically represent things you want to be or elements of yourself that you like too. And I honestly can't say enough good things about him.
Yes. Those segments were hilarious. There was a Twitter account that was posting those segments a couple weeks ago. And the two that I had seen that I thought were hilarious, where there was one with the body bag. It's just you guys are riffing on these cliches back and forth for like a good 2 minutes. And
I forgot entirely about that. It was Saban in a bag, right?
Yeah, he's just hanging out in the background.
I had completely forgot we did that, man. Oh, man. Wow.
And then there's one where he's doing a wrestler's court in the bathroom with like a judge's wig on, just like standing on like, I think he's either like, he's just got like his arms up on the top of like the stall wall. and you're
Yep.
kind of nearby, and you're like razzing somebody else, but it's totally like a spoof, a satire on what people think like Wrestler's Court is supposed to be.
Yeah, we kind of wanted it to be like Wilson from Home Improvement. I don't know if that show is too dated, but that was a Detroit-based show too. So like he got it right away, of course.
Yeah, no, it totally worked out. And starting this, with you and Chris Sabin, you two started as kind of rivals at first. You guys competed against each other a lot before getting together as a tag team.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, we definitely wrestled each other far more times than we had teamed by the end of 2008, which I think is when TNA finally pulled the trigger on us.
I mean, I became a fan a couple matches in. I think you were wrestling some of your opponents, but I was like, I like these guys. And you guys were different at the time. A lot of tag teams just weren't doing what you guys were doing.
Yeah.
The ringer was cool, and the fact that you guys were you're from Michigan, and I think there was a show in the area, and people were like showing up to support like the hometown guys. I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it was definitely different. We always kind of tried to think outside the box. I would say that honestly, as far as the wrestling style itself, when it was fairly eye-catching at that point in time, because there weren't a lot of smaller teams that were being pushed on a national level in the U.S. The closest thing probably would have been Brian Kendrick and Paul London. And I think we stood out because we were also fortunate enough to work in a company where we were given the utmost freedom as far as how we wrestled too, and presentation. So we were basically throwing things at a wall, and whatever the company liked, they allowed us to keep, and whatever they didn't, or whatever ideas we had that they didn't agree with, those just kind of got X'd out. But we were successful in part because we had already teamed together by the time you saw us on TNA for probably about a year or so.
Okay.
So we already had an advantage there.
And it just worked out, tag champs. And, it's kind of changed directions. At what point in your career did you start planning for a life after wrestling?
Oh, man, honestly, probably 2009. I would say 2009, maybe late 2008 even. What actually happened, I got to give them credit, was Impact or TNA or whatever had signed Xavier Woods, Consequences Creed, Austin Creed, whatever, in 2008. And he was actually finishing up his first degree at that point in time. And I was so enamored with that. I thought that was so cool that this guy was going to school and he would have these college classes and he was wrestling on TV at the same time. And he graduated, and his first loop, as we call them, on the road was with me. I saw that he was booked for those. And at that point in time, I don't know how it works there now, but, we were doing house shows probably half the month or so. And if you didn't have somebody to ride with, you're going to ride on your own. But he was brand new to the company. So I just kind of offered, hey, man, do you want to hop in a car with me and Samoa Joe? And he did. And he explained to me his academic career and how he wanted to have a life after wrestling. And I just thought that was so neat. So about a year after that, I was starting to get complacent with the company itself because I realized, like, it really doesn't matter what we do here. We're kind of pigeonholed as a certain thing. And I didn't know where wrestling was going to take me, even though I was at an arguably high level. Financially, it didn't necessarily reward me past a really well-paid mechanical engineer.
Okay.
And I thought at that stage, it would probably be a good idea to make sure that I don't have to rely on my body for the rest of my life. And cerebrally speaking, I can fend for myself and make ends meet too. So I started taking classes in 2009. That was my first degree.
Okay. And when you stepped away, I believe it was 2016, 2017. If I'm incorrect on that, please correct me.
2018.
Oh, 2018. Okay. Was it a plan, or did you just kind of hit a point where like, okay, I'm at this point, I need to not be wrestling right now?
No, it was planned out entirely. What happened was in 2016, I had a few different contract offers from various companies. And I signed with Ring of Honor because I knew I was going to be entering into a new stage of my physical therapy program. And this was going to involve clinical rotations too, where you go and work in the field like all medical degrees do. And I knew exactly how long it was going to take. And I thought, well, if I sign this Ring of Honor contract for 2 years, it would literally take me right up into the point of the full-time clinical rotations. I would have done some that were part-time beforehand, but I had the full-time ones in front of me. And I didn't want to risk wrestling as well as working in physio, because if I got hurt or there was a travel incident or whatever might happen, and I couldn't make my clinical rotation, even for like a few hours, you got to make that up. And it didn't look good to me on paper to try and juggle that. Like I would have burnt out, and I already was, to be honest with you. So that was entirely orchestrated beforehand. And I will give Ring of Honor credit too. They were so flexible with me in the 2 years I was there. And I don't necessarily know that I hit my potential or the Machine Guns hit their potential at that point in time. I feel like currently our Impact run is probably stronger than any of the things we did in Ring of Honor. And we've only been in Impact for however many months. But it is what it is, and it's done now. Ring of Honor helped me out so much by just making sure I had a job and I was employed and I could still go to school. And they bent to lengths that I was surprised they were willing to do. But I worked as hard as I could when I was there. That's for sure.
That's awesome. What attracted you to physio? What attracted you to that particular aspect of the medical field?
Well, I originally had X amount of dollars set aside, and I was going to pursue my master's in business administration because I already had a bachelor's. And I remember being on the road in New Japan, and I was studying for the GMAT, which is an entrance exam for your master's degree. And we had an athletic trainer and a massage therapist who was also an athletic trainer on staff too. They're ATCs, that's the vernacular, but they were so good. And they got everybody through the big shows, through the long trips, and through the tours. And I thought, man, this is so neat. So I took a few of my master's classes, and financially speaking, while I had enough for it, I thought, oh my gosh, man, this is so expensive. I'd rather like put my money towards something else rather than get another degree in this field. Maybe I can diversify my skill set a little bit. And that's when I started pursuing physio instead. And I would say ultimately it was a combination of both having injuries myself and going to physical therapy, and not necessarily getting great physical therapy every time either, because people don't necessarily understand pro wrestlers or athletes, high-level athletes. Like, it's a different breed. And combination of Najima and Misawa, who are the names of the ATCs on the New Japan tours with us too.
Okay. It seems to be, and I've noticed some athletes and wrestlers like wanting to get into the medical field. I know Thornstowe from Reno Scum works as an ER tech. I don't know his exact job, but I know he worked in an emergency room at the start of the pandemic. I believe Kimberly's getting into the vet field. There's another wrestler who's getting into that too. There's a former NFL player, Anshul Roll, who's doing his neurosurgery residency at Mass General. What do you think what would you say is the attraction for athletes to go into the medical field? Is it just because of injuries, or maybe they're looking for some kind of challenge? What would be your guess?
It's tough to say. I remember years ago, I was talking to a medical sales rep, and this gentleman was pretty high up the ladder. Medical sales reps don't necessarily have to have a medical degree at all. But I remember him telling me at that point in time, this was maybe 2014, because I was somewhat interested in that field too, that pro athletes or collegiate athletes go one of two ways. They either burn out, or they tend to veer towards the medical field because they realize, like, oh my gosh, this is a good field. It helps people, which a lot of people want to do if they're involved in athletics, because you're so used to being on a team and working with others. And the smartest ones will go for doctorates if they can, if they have the time or the bandwidth to do so. And I kind of dismissed it at the time, thinking, like, really? It doesn't seem so likely. Like, I don't know any athletes who have done that. But I realized that pro wrestling is its own sect too. So I researched it a little bit. And yeah, a lot of pro athletes do get into medicine. As you mentioned, an NFL player pursuing a neurosurgery degree, that's amazing, and that's a really, really challenging field. We work with neurosurgeons and physio, and man, oh man, like talk about a thankless job. That's so hit or miss. Like neurosurgery is so challenging because nerves themselves heal very variably. It's either zero point 0.1 millimeters or zero point 0.9 millimeters a day. And that's a huge discrepancy. So like with neurosurgery, you don't know how it's going to return. Whereas with orthopedics and physical therapy, you can pretty much expect it because it's more mechanically based. But I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. I think a lot to do with the idea that you're helping people. I think a lot of people want to help people inherently, especially pro wrestlers. And I think really, truly, it's just a good option. I think wrestlers are athletes and they do like to be challenged. We are competitive to a point, but we also work well with others. And medicine in and of itself is always going to be around. You look at a lot of the occupations that were dismissed or cut down on at the beginning of the pandemic, and yeah, medicine was part of it, but a lot of people are getting called back now too because it's back to where it was. And your medicines and your engineering, your finance, these things are always going to be pretty solid choices as far as livelihoods go.
Yeah, that was a solid tangent. I just learned about how nerves heal and a couple stuff I'd never heard before. So that's totally great. I enjoyed that. I learned something. Great.
Cool, man.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Antrel Roll was an NFL player, I believe, for 8 years. Played in college. Yeah, he left the NFL. He was named a Rhodes Scholar while he was in the NFL. He was pursuing something else, and then when he left, he went. Yeah, so he's I'm in Connecticut. He's up in Massachusetts at Mass General at the start of the pandemic. He was working with COVID patients because they weren't doing a lot of his field
Yeah.
procedures.
Yeah.
Um,
They need to.
yeah, so he would like call into the morning shows and like give like a report after he would do a 10-hour shift, call into the show and be like, hey, this is what I'm seeing in a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that it was interesting to me to see these athletes. You guys leave and you go into a medical field of be it physio, be it neurosurgery. I just was wondering, it's the competitive wanting to learn, but you're around the medical field keeps you all going.
I would say so. And there's something intrinsically rewarding about it too. You don't always help people. Like it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes things don't go according to plan. Sometimes people really don't want to be helped, as weird as that may sound. But every once in a while you get people who are so extremely grateful that you were there for them and you really made an impact in their lives. And to me, that's just highly rewarding.
Yeah. And when you kind of step back into wrestling, was it hard to kind of get back into the right the right headspace and physically, or was it just kind of step back in and oh, here we go, I did this.
Right. I was always taught by one of my mentors, Joey Mercury, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
Yeah.
So he was the first guy who kind of put his neck out for me to bring me back. And I expressed interest in wanting to come back to him. And as far as physicality goes, I knew what to expect, of course. I'd been doing this long enough. As far as physical conditioning goes, I never really let myself go. I mean, I made a couple of changes, but I didn't stop going to the gym. I didn't stop my nutrition and swap it out for something that was subpar. I didn't gain a bunch of weight. So it really wasn't too hard for me there. I remember getting compliments actually after my first couple matches by guys like, when was the last time you wrestled again? And how long has it been? And what I don't think they realized too is like, yeah, it had been probably 14 months since my last match between matches. But even before that, I think my last singles match was in like 2015 or 2016 or something like that. And that's a different ball game altogether, singles wrestling versus tag wrestling. As far as mindset goes, though, I was in a good spot because for me, I had pretty bad anxiety and depression. And I didn't realize it. And it got worse and worse and worse. And I went through some things in my personal life. And eventually I saw a psychologist, and I saw them not for a medication referral, but more so to figure out like what I should do. And they sent me to a psychiatrist. I think I have those disciplines right as far as who prescribes and who doesn't. But either way, I started getting mental health counseling, and I got that for probably about 5 months or so. And I really feel like it helped me. One of the things that I realized about myself is I tend to get bored quickly. I don't really know what I want most of the time. At the same time, I have trouble enjoying the present moment too, or I did at that point. And for me, I think that plays into why I was so academically enthused about things while I was wrestling. I always wanted something else because whatever was in front of me, I felt like I had conquered or mastered or whatever the case may be. I don't mean to sound braggadocious. Just like when you get good at something, I want to do more. I want to be challenged. So I'm trying to challenge myself in a lot of ways. And I think that happened with wrestling too. I would get comfortable in a spot and then kind of start to grow stagnant there in my own mind and become unhappy. And I like to do new things. So coming back to wrestling, I knew two things. I knew, first of all, now I don't have to rely on wrestling at all. I don't have to do this. I don't have to be here anymore. Whereas I felt very trapped before by contracts and being in a particular situation where I had to work for this company and this was my only means of income and I have nothing else. I'm just a wrestler. I felt that way. Of course, that wasn't the case per se. Anybody can do anything. You, me, any brother, other sucker on the street, right? Anybody can do anything. But I felt like all I could do was wrestle. So now I had proven to myself, okay, that's definitely not the case, man. You've got 2 college degrees and you're working in a field you love. Now wrestling's a labor of love. Now you're choosing to come back because you actively want to do it. Nothing's stopping me from just not getting on a plane and going to Ring of Honor. I could do that. I mean, it would be a terrible idea. It'd be bad business, it'd be unethical, but I could do it. So when I came back knowing that I was in a good spot and I had a net underneath me and I had that self-efficacy of, yeah, I want to be here and yeah, I can do anything I want. I really was in a pretty good spot mentally, but I was nervous as hell. So that was probably the biggest obstacle the first couple matches. But even then, it really wasn't too bad. Honestly, it really wasn't. I get equally nervous now as I did before my matches then. So, and I tell myself before I go out to, it's like, this isn't the end of the world, man. Even if you get hurt, it's not the end of the world. Life goes on.
And thanks for sharing, and that's important. Anyone that's listening to this, if you don't feel right, you don't feel yourself, and I've been to therapy too. It's go get help. Get help if you maybe don't think you can afford it. There's resources, and
I would say so. Absolutely. It's going to be a huge field going forward. Pain management and pain psychology is going to be huge in my field, but in general, therapy doesn't mean what it used to mean. It used to be, oh, you had an issue. Something was wrong, and that's why you're going to therapy. It's not that something's wrong. It's that you need a different perspective. You just need a different view. You just need somebody to talk to and unload.
yeah.
So it's basically just broadening your horizon versus fixing a problem, quote unquote. And again, I was only there for 4 or 5 months. Some people go for years and years and years, and it's more so a tune-up for them. They just like to go and talk. It's somebody to talk to. That's ultimately all it is.
Yeah.
Or yeah, and I don't mean to say all it is, right? Like I don't mean to diminish.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been fits and spurts. I've been for 4 or 6 months. The last time I went for 2 months, and it was just to get stuff. I had to flush stuff out, and it was good to hear from someone who doesn't know me, someone who's not attached to my life. Get all this stuff out, and then hear the feedback. Like, oh, okay, that's it. Yeah. So
like Joey told me to, and he's been in therapy. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing that about him. I think he's pretty proud of what he's overcome in his life, as he should be. But I remember him telling me, and I thought this was so cool. He's like, Patrick, as soon as you talk about something, the words don't have the power they used to, right? Like you're unloading, you're taking the power away from your feelings once you verbalize them to somebody else too. And I remember I mentioned that to my therapist, and he goes, oh, he's absolutely right. You can tell he's been to therapy before. He said, that's why it's just talking. That's why it's nothing else. You just sit there and talk. And I really, really benefited from it. I love it, man. Honestly, I would go just to go. Right? Like
just normal stuff. Yeah, like this is what I did today,
Yeah, man. I would go just to go if I could. But I had a good therapist. Like this guy was like 3 years older than me. He was an athlete himself. We had a lot of the same interests. You're not supposed to ask them questions, but I remember I asked him a couple questions. He was totally cool about it and actually answered them. He was great, never really set up any like boundaries or rules. I felt totally comfortable talking to him. And I gave him a huge hug, and my eyes were filled with tears when I finally had my last session. I'm like, dude, I'm probably not going to come anymore, but I just want you to know how much you helped me. And I should really like hit him up probably and just let him know how well I've done in the past year. I think he'd really like that. But yeah, it's awesome, man. If I could have done it all over again, And there's nothing to say I can't, but I'm taking a break from school right now, I think. I probably would have gotten into that field.
And that's awesome. Again, thanks for sharing. And folks listening, therapy is okay. If you just need to get stuff out, if you have deep-seated issues, there's nothing wrong with going. There's nothing wrong with you. You just sometimes need to get stuff out, different perspective.
Yeah.
And to jump back into wrestling, and one of the questions I wanted to ask since you kind of came back, for you and Saban to kind of walk back into Impact, and over the past, I would say year and a half, Impact's like been reloading. They've been focusing on building the present and the future. I am of the opinion that the North were the most important thing happening in Impact for the past year. What was that like for you and Saban to walk back into Impact, which is a very different company now than when you were there, and to step in the ring against, the North, Ethan Page and Josh Alexander, and walk away with those titles? Kind of what was that whole for that day experience like?
I was pretty intimidated. So Josh and Ethan are guys that used to watch me, like go to shows and watch me when I was 22, 23. And I knew that they wanted that match specifically. So yeah, it was important to me, but I knew how important it was to them. And that makes it more important to me, of course, because I'm an empath through and through. I know they're good, and I know they kind of held down the fort as well. I thought it was a good challenge. I also had to be aware of the fact that my partner is a guy who literally hasn't wrestled in about 18 months, and he's had 3 torn ACLs. Jeez. And that said, he's still phenomenal. But that's something that's in the back of your mind too. And I also have to deal with the idea of, as you mentioned, Impact being a different company. And yeah, I may have some goodwill built up in the wrestling community, or I may have a track record, but at the same time, I still have to prove myself. It's very much a case of, like, what have you done for me lately? It doesn't matter what anybody does in wrestling now, especially now, because it's forgotten about by the end of the week, right? Like, it doesn't matter how good your match is. By the end of the month, I guarantee there's going to be something equally good as people subjectively view it. So you have to produce every time. And when guys come to me for advice, I stress consistency. Consistently be good. Don't be great one time or 2 times or 3 times. Be good every single time you go out there. And if you can do that, you'll kind of build up some steam. You'll get that behind you and some momentum. And I think that's important. So going into a situation against North, I had no momentum, like nothing. I have nothing really working for me that way. And I usually pride myself on having that. And then being challenged by those guys too, because they're very good and they're very on point, and they know exactly who they are, and they know exactly how they want to wrestle, and they know exactly what to do and when to do it. To have that test put in front of me was not stressful, but definitely challenging.
It's awesome. I was one of the fans who, when Ethan Page kind of first popped up, I wasn't like a fan. I just, maybe something didn't click, as when you're a viewer. But then as time went on, I was like, oh, okay, getting it. And then seeing him and Josh work together is just, they're scary good. Y'all are too, but they're scary good.
Maybe though, like, Ethan got better. Consider this too, right? Consider that they would grow, or they should be growing. Yeah. If the things are in the right spots for them, as far as like the company allowing them to improve their skill set, then they should by all rights. And I think that's probably what happened too. Not to say that they weren't good to begin with, not the case, but that they probably got better.
Yeah. And how do you see Impact's tag division presently? There's a lot of competition now. Good Brothers are here, and the Rascals. I'm a fan of the Rascals, have been kind of since Jump. There's a lot of folks want those tag titles. So how do you?
Yeah. I think they have a pretty cool roster. All in all, like as I mentioned before, I was a WWF kid growing up. So for me, the aesthetics are quite stark. Like I noticed that first and foremost. And I look around the Impact locker room and it's like, holy shit, man, there's wrestlers of all shapes and sizes, and everybody's gear is different. The way they wrestle is different. Obviously, the way they appear is very different. And I think that creates a more competitive environment because you have to figure out and think deductively as far as how you're going to do certain things. Like, you can't just do the same thing every time. You can't. It won't be good. It won't work. So the tag division is a very good example of that, because even with the teams that we're currently head-to-head against, the North and the Good Brothers and Fulton and Ace, as well as the Rascals, they're all very different. I think that is important, because that means everybody has to kind of step their game up and sharpen their skills. And you can try doing the same thing every time, but to a point that's going to get old quick. People are going to get sick of that shit, and your opponents are going to figure it out, and it's just not going to be as effective. So I really, really, really think that the variety is a good thing. I'm a huge fan of the Rascals.
Yeah.
I think those guys have a great work ethic. They really do. I know Trey in particular was a fan of mine, because he's told me this much, right? Like verbatim, and so have Des and Zach. And they were actually our first match back in Impact too. And I was so happy we got to wrestle them. And I hope we get to wrestle them again and again. We've had 2 matches against Zach and Des, and I think they're just incredible. And I think we could get something out of them that nobody else could. I think they could get something out of us that nobody else could too. But the Good Brothers, since you asked about them, I've known them a long time. I've known Carl for years and years. And yeah, Carl. I first met him in 2003, man. We were on an independent show outside of Dayton in Ohio, and there were like 50 people there. And I've seen him so many different stages of my career and his. And I just think he's one of the absolute best. So I'm thrilled that they're there. I mean, they annoy the hell out of me. Like,
you mentioned that Dayton show. Okay, because I do listen to their podcast. I think you actually mentioned that Dayton show on one of the recent podcasts about like there being like 40, 50 people there. Something weird happened. I was in my car. I wasn't like super listening, but I remember hearing Dayton, and he mentioned something about that show, and I just don't remember what it was.
Dude, it was independent wrestling at its finest. It was at a VFW hall. I think I got paid like $15, and there were free hot dogs. And I think the main event was neither of us, of course. Right? But the main event was like somebody namely fighting in the crowd with New Jack's music playing. It wasn't New Jack. And,
boo. Boo to
yeah,
that.
I think it was New Jack's music, or it might have been Walk by Pantera. Like, I don't know, man. It was like, even as a 18-year-old watching this, I was like, man, this is like Bush League, you know? And it's like, but it's insane. You have to have these shows, right? Because guys like me and Carl Anderson are going to come out of them. This is like where we cut our teeth too.
Yeah.
So these environments are important ultimately, but yeah, that's when I first met him. And he became one of my absolute best friends, one of my brothers, when we lived together in Japan, because we were both in the dojo for a while too.
Okay.
And I just think he's so incredibly talented. Like, he's a top guy anywhere he wants to be, honestly. And Gallows is awesome too. I think he's the epitome of like a moving big man. Like, for a guy that size to be as agile and light on his feet as he truly is, it's quite impressive. And I really appreciate it now more than I ever did, because I work with guys his size, and these guys are hurt, but it's like, oh my God, man, you know, you like, Gallows is a solid 6'6", a solid 300 plus pounds, and like, he can get up off the ground quicker than a lot of junior heavyweights. That's incredible, man. Like, he's such a talented athlete, and he's just so experienced. We're about the same age, and he's just been around as long as I have, in completely different companies and situations. But he's been successful for that long too. I think that's really cool.
It's a solid division. I look forward to it every week. It is solid. Now, to get to that's not good, but like the good stuff, you know, you're kind of returned to the independent scene after years away. Warrior Wrestling, you know, tomorrow, TurboGrafx 16, which has kind of become an event for independent wrestling over the past couple years. And you're taking on Kylie Rae, which is Midwest is kind of, I would say, the Midwest independents kind of, people see it as her territory. How are you feeling stepping into that match against it's kind of a home game for her?
Yeah, I would say so. She's been in Black Label longer than I have. I don't know, man. Like, I don't consider it independence anybody's territory. And quite frankly, I would have considered it like Punk Cabana Heroes territory if I was going to consider it anybody's.
Fair.
That stated, Kylie's work ethic is unparalleled. Like, she works hard. It's interesting. There's a former TNA knockout. Don't really like that term, but she was asking me about coming back to wrestling. And I said, well, I can tell you this much. The level of talent now in Impact versus the level of talent when you were there 10 years ago approximately is like night and day. And the ladies now are just so much better. Like, they're just better. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, that knockouts division. I had been a fan of Jordan Grace prior to, at Beyond Wrestling, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I had been a fan of like Kimberly back 10 years ago when she was like doing Chikara, winning the Grand Championship, having these like 30-minute matches against like Lufisto. And this knockouts division has like, Tasha Steeles, Kira Hogan. Like, I know Tasha from up here in Northeast. This division for my opinion, and not to like kiss anybody's butt, right now out of the companies on television is the best women's division top to bottom.
Yeah, and I can't speak to the other ones. I do know a lot of the gals in NXT are great. Like, I was down there and around that culture long enough to see some of them, and I thought, wow, man, they work really hard. They're really good. So I can't pick and choose, but I can definitely say that overall, women's wrestling on a whole is much more skilled than it was 10 plus years ago. Why is that? Is that because they were able to access more Joshi stuff in Japan? Maybe. Is it because of Shimmer? Probably. Is it because the Knockouts division was widely broadcast and it was like the first national women's division that was really strong and it inspired a lot of girls to get into wrestling? Probably that too. It's probably all these things. But there's a lot of really good wrestlers there. Jordan Grace is very good too. So I think Kylie appreciates that. Like, she's one of the reasons that women's wrestling on an independent level is still very strong too, because you have to have that. Is she on national TV? Yes, she is, but she's just a workhorse, man. She's come to me and asked me to watch her matches and what can I do better and what did I do wrong. And I never tell people they did anything wrong. Never do I tell people they did anything wrong, because they didn't. They may have done something differently than I would have, but it's never wrong. So I've given her my perspective before, because I don't give advice. I give perspective. I give you ideas. I give you maybe some tools to work with, but I never like give you advice. Like, who am I? You know what I mean?
All right.
And I'll be interested to see if she can apply any of that when I wrestle her. I'm very, very curious. But as far as like conditioning goes, man, there's no substitute for road work. Like, honestly, you could be the best wrestler in the world, but you'd be that much better if you were in your best condition, wouldn't you? And she works her ass off. Just, I can honestly say that, men, women, canine, feline, it doesn't matter. She works harder than pretty much anybody I know, and I respect that a lot.
Yeah, and her rivalry kind of with Ethan Page, kind of they traded the freelance title back and forth a little bit. That series of matches is amazing stuff. And you're right, she work hard. And I wanted to circle back to what you said about the knockouts division, how the women today are so much more skilled. And I think it's part of what you said, having maybe more access to the Joshi stuff, seeing the knockouts division then, but I also think it's seeing in some places women's wrestling 10 years ago not being as valued in some places as it should have been. And that can be a motivator. Like, well, I'm going to get into wrestling. I'm not going to be on TV for 3 minutes. I'm going to make them make me pay attention. And I think it's kind of like a stretch of rubber band and it snaps back. And I think that was maybe part of it. Could be, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe a rebound effect. I mean, at the same time, too, there were men who were on TV for 3 minutes, too. I think the fact of the matter is that there were really, really talented women's wrestlers who just weren't being highlighted at that point in time. Is that business because they weren't making money? I don't know. I think the issue was really truly that they weren't necessarily given a chance. So when they were given a chance, like, there's a pinhole, but they wanted to blow that sucker open and make a canyon out of it. And they worked their asses off to do so. And it was happening in a multitude of companies, right? I know when WWE hired Sarah Del Rey as a coach, like, she was able to start working with some of the girls too. And they got some really good girls come through NXT. And Sarah Stock is incredibly talented. She was one of my training partners at TNA. I used to train with her and Ayako Hamada pretty frequently. And Sarah's just phenomenal in the ring. Like, she's just perfect with her lucha libre, and she works really hard too. I mean, she was always in the gym, you know, and I think that started to rub off on people, or they saw certain girls like that, or women, I shouldn't say girls, I suppose. And it was just inspiring, and it did set a good example too. Whether or not the companies appreciated it at the time as far as what they had, who knows? You know, you look at Thea Trinidad, and obviously she's blown up in WWE, but was only so at Impact or TNA or whatever. And yeah, I guess you could say that for shit, like dozens of people. But yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's awesome. So I don't give a shit about the genitalia of my opponent. I don't care about women's wrestling versus men's wrestling. I care about my wrestling, first and foremost. So put me in there with Kylie Rae or Kimberly or Sarah Stock. It sounds fine. Yeah, great, cool.
And yeah, your return to the independents you've done with Warrior Wrestling with their Stadium series, and kind of in this new normal, and you being in the medical field, how have you observed like practices and testing and social distancing? Like some promotions seem to be doing a very, very good job of it.
Yeah, you know, honestly, they're doing everything they can, and I think it comes down to basically at this point with the virus being what it is. If it truly is a virus, then we're all going to get exposed to it. I mean, that's just how viruses work. I know the issue early on was triage. So people were flooding the hospitals, and it was widely contagious. So, you know, you're spreading it around, and you're not saving the people who can be saved. And that's sad, right? Because there's people who potentially could be saved. On top of that, too, I don't think a lot of people realize how painful being on a respirator is, too. So I know I was friends with an orthopedic surgeon at that point in time. They actually called her in to start intubating people, or asked her if she would be willing to do it. She said, well, I haven't done that in a long time. They're like, oh, okay, it's not a big deal. Just take the surgery when it comes back, because they put all electives on hold. And she explained to me in all the conference calls with the hospital systems around here that one of the things they highlighted was a need to stress to people how dangerous respirators can truly be too. Because what they do is they take away the muscle function of inhalation, exhalation. So you're not using your muscles anymore. When you get off it, if you've been on it for 2 weeks, you can't breathe of your own volition, right? It's really hard because the muscles have atrophied. So that was a major issue too. These things have, for the most part, been conquered because hospital systems aren't worried about triage the way they were. I mean, obviously you still don't want anybody to be on a respirator, but at least people aren't flooding the hospitals. So obviously the protocols that have been put in place are social distancing, mask wearing, hand sanitizing, hand washing, checking oneself, feelings of malaise, right? If you feel bad, like, don't come in. And that's about all any system can do right now, as far as I can tell, because they still don't entirely understand the virus. Obviously, there's no vaccine. That's going to take a while, even if they hot shot it. But how do you stop people from living? And I feel like a Black Label, it was the first time I wrestled in front of a crowd, and then Warrior 2, they're doing as much as they can. And they're doing what a lot of buildings are doing. You know, you get checked at the door, temperature, and they ask you a series of questions, and that's about it. And it sucks that that's like all we can do for the most part, but that is kind of all you can do. And honestly, I see more risk for a lot of people just being out in the public and then working in medicine too. Like, you go to the grocery store and they may cap attendance, but man, the other day I saw somebody pull their mask down, smell a piece of fruit, and then put it back, mask up, walk away. You know, and this stuff happens all the time. So it's really intimidating, and I respect everybody's personal viewpoint on it for sure, because now it's to the point where it's like almost a religious belief. You don't want to tell somebody how to feel about these things whatsoever. So it sucks. I mean, it is what it is. I hope they figure out some sort of vaccine for it soon. I don't know how they will, because trials need to be done. But yeah, the companies are doing the best they can. I can honestly say that much.
So you've got, yep. Okay, I mean, that's, you know, but again, wash your hands, wear a mask, you know.
Yeah. I mean, what else can you do?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You know,
now,
and then like there's a bunch of social things too. Divorce rate is up 35%. I think suicide rate is up quite a bit. I can't remember the exact statistic. Opioid death rate is up. You know, so it's like all these other factors are
ripple effect.
big time butterfly effect, because people are losing their minds in a lot of ways. And then I don't even want to think about the financial repercussions for a lot of folks too, your small business owners and such. But yeah, it's unfortunate on every level.
Yeah, well, wrestling is here to, I guess, kind of distract people. I've been to two shows since.
Yeah.
Now they've got two shows going tomorrow. Now, have you had a chance outside of your match? Is there any kind of match that you've come across or seen or heard in particular that maybe you're interested in as a wrestler or as a fan? Or
No, I mean, the Black Label roster is pretty strong. So I've seen these guys in a lot of different places. And I mean, I'm sure all the matches are going to be great, but there's nothing that stands out.
okay, and I had seen during Beyond's last show, the Shangri-La Mahastral, you had on social media, I kind of mentioned about wanting to maybe do some work with Beyond.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that would be great. They've reached out to me before. It didn't work out for whatever reason. But honestly, I just know that it's a staple of independent wrestling in the Northeast. And I think that's important. I think it's important to have that to contrast Black Label, to contrast AIW or Warrior. Like, the more independent wrestling companies that can consistently run shows and build up a name value, the better it is for everybody, wrestlers, promoters, fans alike.
Is there, and maybe, and who knows, anyone in particular that you'd seen at a Beyond show that you'd be interested in wrestling? I can name like 3 or 4 people that I think you would match up good against.
Why don't you name them?
Chris Dickinson, who's kind of the staple out here. He's kind of considered the gatekeeper, the big guy. Chuck O'Neill would be an interesting clash of styles. If you and Chris want to head out here and take on like the Bird and the Bee or Mike Vernon, Rex Lawless, or Bear Country, I think
Bear Country. So I like Bear Country a lot, actually. I think they're awesome. I like everything about those guys. I like that they travel. I like that they put the miles on the road. I love that they think outside the box. I think they're good athletes for their size. I think they're badass, man. I think they're really cool.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a match I'd pay money to see. Guns versus Bear Country.
I would love to work with those guys. I would love to wrestle those guys. I mean, I don't know if it'll be with Saban. It probably won't, but I would love to wrestle those guys.
Find you a tag partner.
Yeah, if I was to get a tag partner now, it would probably be Lee Moriarty. I would probably have him as my independent tag team partner, I think.
How good is he? Because he's Lee Moriarty.
He's very good. He's very good. I think that's pretty well known at this point.
And as you do you see it as, and again, I don't want to presume and jump to conclusion, you kind of getting back into like singles matches and doing these matches, and you get in these singles matches, people pay attention. Do you see it as like getting the next crop of folks ready, or do you think they're ready and just want to test yourself against these new, the new folks coming up?
I mean, I just like singles wrestling, period. So for me, it's nice because, they're new, right? Like, these are new wrestlers that I've never wrestled before. I like that. I don't give a shit how old you are. You can be new crop, old crop, whatever. But I like doing singles matches too. And I'm fairly certain that Saban's probably not going to do any independent work, which is his prerogative. But it's good for me because it keeps me sharp. And it makes me think differently too. And it's easy to get stuck in a rut. It's really easy to get stuck in a rut as a tag team wrestler. It truly is. Because you can rely on your partner for X amount. You know that they're going to pick up some of the slack. So for me especially, I don't want to have to be relying on that per se. I don't mind being reliant on that. That is part of being a successful tag wrestler. But I want to make sure that I can think quick. I want to make sure that if there's a situation that comes up, boom, I have an answer, or I have an idea, or I have an out, whatever the case may be.
Nice. I'm excited. Yeah, tomorrow, IWTV, I believe 12 and 5 Central. So that would be 1 and 6 here in the Northeast. I'm in Connecticut. You taking on Kylie Rae, a whole day of wrestling. I'm sure that's going to be a long day for everyone involved. I'm sure you've got to be there fairly early.
I'd imagine so.
And just for me, and kind of one last question before I let you go here. And again, I really appreciate the time. We've got a lot of good stuff. Just as a fan, Wrestle Kingdom 9 was the first Wrestle Kingdom I ever watched. It was the first one that was broadcast here. And I mean, you and Kushida the Time Splitters kind of became a favorite of mine. I think I have a shirt around here floating somewhere.
Oh, wow.
I got it from someone, like, it was like where they weren't doing international shipping, so I like reached out to someone who reached out to someone who got me a
Cool.
shirt. It's somewhere, I have to find it. That in the Wrestle Kingdom, the Tokyo Dome is like this to folks who don't go there. It's like this mythical. Just
Right.
what's that like? Like you and Kushida, like you're the tag team time splitters, multiple time IWGP tag champions. Just what's it like to wrestle there? Like what's that week like?
Oh man, I've been there as a Machine Guns too. So Saban and I were the first time I went there. We wrestled No Limit, who Naito and Yujiro, and holy shit, man! Like the building itself is just monstrous. So to give you an idea, I don't know how much people have talked about this. I don't think a whole lot of American guys have gone over there and done the dome. I guess a fair amount have at this point who would do podcasts or whatever the case may be, but you have this locker room and there's multiple locker rooms. So where you change is actually kind of indicative of your position in the company. Are you with the other foreigners, or are you with the Japanese, or whatever the case may be? Everybody kind of sticks to their own cliques. Like the CMLL guys would be here, and the Impact guys would be here, and the NWA guys would be here, and so on and so forth. First year I was there, obviously, I was with the Impact guys. Well, second year I was, or I guess it wouldn't be the second year, but the next time I was there, I was with the New Japan locker room because I was under New Japan contract, and I was in the Time Splitters. But it's a huge building because it's a baseball stadium, mostly. And you have to navigate this maze backstage, which, there's catering and there's trainers and there's A, B, and C, and all these different nooks and crannies. And you have to get in a van to go to a different part of the building. You have to go through an airlock because it's a dome, so it has to stay inflated. So any of your domes typically have like pressure control. So you have to go through an airlock and get in a van and then go outside and then drive through here. Now you're in this area. Now you go here to a waiting room. So it's a really, really intimidating atmosphere if you've never done it before. And I was pretty fortunate the first time Kushi and I did it that I knew exactly what to expect because I had been through there and I kind of been shell-shocked already, no pun intended. And I absolutely cherish teaming with Kushida. I know a lot of people have their particular favorites of my teams, like whether they prefer Machine Guns or Time Splitters. I love teaming with Kushida, though, and I hope to do it again in the near future. And for us to do the Dome, especially for him, because he grew up viewing New Japan very much the way I viewed WWF, it was just a dream come true for him, and that rubbed off on me, too. So to be there with my friend and live out his dream with him was just a magical experience. I sound too gushy, but I don't know how else to describe it. It was just so cool. It'd be neat if we got to do another one before our careers are over, but if we don't, I'll be happy with it too.
Yeah, it kind of, I had been familiar with New Japan, but I really hadn't had a chance to watch much because there just wasn't a lot of access.
Right.
And then they announced, Wrestle Kingdom 9 is going to be broadcast live. I forget the service, but I paid for it, and I was up at 2 a.m. And pretty much ever since when they launched New Japan World here, I've had it. I'm in the midst of watching one. It was just such a cool event for, again, American fans who don't see a lot of that, who hadn't seen a lot at that point. It was like I kind of knew I knew who you were. I knew who Kushida was. I knew you guys were a tag team, but I hadn't seen many of your matches.
Right.
And then you guys come up with the DeLorean, and it's like it's like 3 in the morning, and I'm sitting there with drinking a coffee and just being like, this is pretty cool. I'm having a good time.
Oh yeah. It was cool, man. The DeLorean entrance was neat, and it was my idea to get white gear for that too, and it was just we had a hell of a time. One of the best parts of my career, easily.
Okay. That's awesome. Alex, thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you take on Kylie Rae tomorrow. Again, folks, IWTV.com, whole weekend of wrestling. There's shows on Saturday, and I believe there's something on Sunday. I don't know. Don't be mad at me. But Black Label Pro puts on a great show time after time. Go look at the old ones. Watch tomorrow. Hopefully we can get Alex Shelley over here to Beyond so I can see him wrestle Bear Country. Him and more Lee Moriarty over here is fine. He's only done one match here. Would like to get him for more.
Yeah, he lives in Pittsburgh, man. He's a lot closer.
I guess. Well, again, Alex, thanks so much. Appreciate the time and good luck tomorrow.
Thank you so much. It was an honor.